All right, okay. Welcome again. Let's see if we can actually. Today's speaker, who I just met, Neil McFail. He's been around a while, well, the thing here, and 38 years in business. He was electrically on Marconi, and had a fair amount to do with discs. And we all think we know about discs, but I suspect we don't. So Neil, you'll tell us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, ladies and gentlemen, to give this talk. Hope you can hear me all right. My voice is a bit on the fritz, but I hope it will keep going. When I gave this lecture about a year ago, at the most. It's changed since then. Nothing stands still. And about 6 months before it, I was trying to think, what can I use as a theme that would cover disk drives? What can I do? And I tried thinking back to when I was in the development manager, and we used to plan projects a couple of years beforehand, anything up to 5 years. We always had a roadmap, where we were going, which products we were going to do, what was going to go into new range or Series 39 and so on. And we had two main classes of technology we had to look at. One of them was the peripheral devices, and I actually talk about disk drives. And we had to understand what was happening and intercept the drives we wanted to use. We had to get in people from Seagate, people from Fujitsu, people from Western Digital, people from Toshiba. They would come in and they would tell us a story about where they were going on disk drives. And they all had different inventions, that they were putting in different improvements. And nobody came along and said, and this is what's happening in the disk drive industry. Nobody did that. On the other hand, so for our products, we wanted to have VLSI chips. And we had an in-house technology department. And they looked at IBM, they looked at Fujitsu, and various other manufacturers, and they said what they were doing, and they analysed it all. And they came up with a coherent presentation every year. And I was very impressed by this. I thought, if they can have a theme that unifies their presentation, why can't I? That's the idea. So to start off with, I'll show you this graph, which I hope is familiar to some of you. They will say it's a disk drive, what to do with transistors per die. They would always show this, and of course we were seeing it progressing each year as my career developed. And you saw, I won't wander away too far. You could see the memory increasing up the top of the curve, and you see processor chips going up, and what interested us was further down, where the gate arrays were. They're not on that chart, but where the gate arrays, the VLSI was going. That's what interested us. But you could see a future going forward, all nicely unified. Their graphs had more than cell products on. They were wonderful. And I thought, oh, and then they would say, and there's Moore's law. We're all right, because there's Moore's law. And it's all going to progress like this, so you can develop your products, it's great. So that was the story on VLSI, but it wasn't like that on this. On this you've got one manufacturer will tell you one thing, and another manufacturer will tell you another. They're all moving forward at different rates, and we had to somehow do the sum of it all. So I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice if I could present a story which led to an understanding like that? Wouldn't it be good? So that's what I set out to do. So you know where I'm going now. Another objective I've got really is to say, well, that's great. Everybody talks about this, but they don't talk about disk drives. So can I convince you that disk drives are better than that? Can I do that? That's the target I have. And when I get to a point in the lecture near the end, I'll ask you how I'm doing. But that's what I want to do. I want to try and convince you that disk drives are better than that, or at least comparable, and raise them in your estimation. Right, what am I going to talk about? Well, I've already started the introduction, I suppose. I'll then go on to drive history, so we can look at some drives together. Have a little flirt with the technology and some of the different things that have gone into disk drives, some of the major improvements, manufacturing as well. Then we'll look at trends and limits. Where are the trends taking us? Where are we going? Are there any limits? A little bit about interfaces and controllers, and a complete stab in the dark at hard disk drive future. But you'll be forming your own opinions about that by the time we get there. So, as part of the introduction, what I need to do is I need a common language with you, because if I start throwing words around later on, I need you to be able to follow me, otherwise you're going to be glazed over. So, my apologies for people who know about disk drives, and for those that don't, there's a quick crash course in disk drives. I'll try and explain that first picture a bit. For most people, a disk drive is something in the machine that whirs and clicks, and they know it stores their data. Occasionally it fills up and they need a new one. Sometimes it breaks. They have to go and buy a new one. And when they go to the shop, they notice two things. They notice that they can have a bigger drive than they had last time, and it doesn't cost them any more. So most people in the street know that disk drives are reducing in cost per bit, and they're increasing capacity. They know that because they see it when they go in the PC world and so on. Right, let's so we know two trends before we start. Let's have a look at a simple disk drive, and I'll talk you through it from the beginning. Now, I'm not talking about any particular disk drive. I'm just going to be mixing technologies so that I get points over. We start off with a motor. Used to be underneath the actual discs. And that drives the spindle. And that's rotating these discs, which are known in the trade as platters. So you'll hear me say platters from time to time, like plates. That's what I'm talking about. The platters are coated with magnetic ferrous oxide or some magnetic material that you can magnetize. And you can have more than one of them, so you can have several platters. And you've got heads, which light the magnetic material, read back from it, can be positioned on the surface by an actuator. You have multiple heads, multiple arms. And I'll show you in a moment what the dressing structure looks like. Obviously the power connector and some sort of interface connector, that's IDE. I'm sure you've all got SATA. And maybe SATA 2, and you might be thinking about SATA 3. So the idea is you've got a rotating surface, you can access it at different points to read your data, and it's electromagnetic. Here's a sort of physical view of one. You'll see over the right-hand side I've got 6 heads here on the end of actuator arms. I've got 3 platters. The arrangement is with the head node I can read the top surface, with the head 5 I can read the bottom surface. And the red circles we call tracks, that's where we're writing as the disk rotates. the platter rotates, and those tracks are split into sectors, which are normally 512 bytes, and a number of sectors will make up what we call the logical block. And when this rotates, you get the information often in the air. You can have multiple tracks in concentric circles if you move in, if you're able to move the actuator in and out from the centre of the disk to the outside of this and vice versa. So multiple tracks. And then you have the concept of a cylinder. I'm going to explain that one too. With a cylinder, if you look at just the red tracks and consider, remember there's going to be a track underneath the block surface, and then the track you can see in the middle, and then the one underneath, and then that track, the one underneath. So the 6 tracks taken together, we call the cylinder. The idea of it is, if you start on the track on the top, on head 0, you can quickly switch to head 1 when you've gone around once, to head 2, to head 3, to head 4, effectively chaining tracks. And that is referred to reading a cylinder, say cylinder 0. If you move the heads in a bit, you do exactly the same on the next set of tracks, and you'll be reading cylinder 1. And that's how it goes. So you run out of tracks or cylinders. This is just throwing some figures to give you an idea of the figures themselves, but it's the relative magnitude of them. You see the disk access time, I've just added them all together. The contentious part is I've added the spin-up time. That's an unusual thing to do in the mainframe world, because we don't care about power consumption particularly. We care about computing power. So we're, at least that's how it used to be, and we're having a disk drive spun up all the time, and we're reading reluctant to switch them off over Christmas. But we do, reluctant. But so that 69 milliseconds comes out. However, if you've got a home video system and portable equipment, your disk is going to spin down, because you can't afford to keep running that level of power. So now, if you want to access it, that 69 milliseconds is there. But for mainframes, it wasn't there. Other than that, you've got to wait until you get halfway around the disk for on average, your sector to come. That's the latency. You've got a time to move the head. You've got to accelerate the head towards the track you want, then deaccelerate it, then allow a time for it to settle over the track. Then you can risk reading it. And you see that that's quite a sizable time on average. The figures could be double those, so we averages. Head switch time, we were talking about going down the cylinder. Obviously that's very quick in relation to the others. And the transfer time of say 1 kilobyte is very small. Doesn't come into it really. The important thing is to be able to track follow, as we would say. Always be reading from one track to the next track to the next track, doing the minimum amount of movement you possibly can. Years ago we had rotational position sensing, which was like an index on the disk. Every time it came round, you know, that sensible. And we used to use that to try all the jobs when we're trying to read data, because you can calculate if it's better to do this read command over here than that one over there. And quite complicated algorithms have developed, which I won't go into, to try to order the reads so that they will be the next ones coming around and you don't miss a revolution. The last thing you want to do is miss a revolution. Unfortunately, I was speaking earlier about CAFs and not talking about English, and that was one of the things that we definitely didn't want to do, is to miss a revolution. And this happened when you were archiving too, when you just got streams of data to put out. The last thing you want to do is to miss a revolution, because you could have anything you would have twice the latency, possibly. You wait 8.5 milliseconds for it to come round again. And that's on a disk rotating at 7,200 RPM, 5,400. If you go back to older disks, it's a lot slower. Right. Here's a head. I think it's a thin film head. Looks like it's sitting on the mirror surface of the disk. It isn't. There's actually two heads there, and they are like a clamshell design, and they are pressed against each other. The heads themselves are shaped underneath, a bit like an aerofoil. And as the disk rotates, it builds up the speed, when the disk is in between those two heads. And it builds up speed, air pressure starts to lift the heads against the springiness of the actuator arm, and the head starts to fly. Didn't always do it that way, but pretty soon they did it that way. Some people call it an air bearing, particularly like that. But, so they fly above this surface, and the height that it flies at turns out to be very important. There's an example of the head on the end of the actuator arm, and that is driven by an actuator which is moving the head in an arc on this surface. So you can get it to that track or that track or that track or that track, whatever is required. These days they move so fast they're hard to spot where they are. You might see a big movement, but you never see any of the small ones. Right. Getting into a little bit more of the magnetic side of it. There we've got some bits pre-written on this surface. The area you write a bit in is what we call the magnetic region. And you see I've aligned magnetic poles in one direction and in the opposite direction, and whatever, according to a pattern of ones and noughts. A particular encoding technique that shows is NRZ, but there were many others. This is quite an early one. And the idea mainly is that if, in fact, you get a big transition, then you know you've got a change from 0 to 1. If you don't, you haven't. And this was the sort of idea they had, but they, in future drives, they used to encode it up a bit, and maybe got 6 bits into 8, things like that, so that you could guarantee to have transitions when they start introducing servos and things like data tracks. Now, the efficiency of the head depends on the gap, which is between the bottom of the head and the surface. If you have it far away, you need a big magnetic field. If you have it close, you need less of a magnetic field. If the material is easy to magnetize, that's great. If it isn't, then you need more current. And what size the things are going to be, the head or the gap, depend on your ability to shrink the head and shrink the gap. The smaller you can make the gap, the smaller the density you can write, the higher the density you get, and the more you can be able to go in the shop and buy a bigger disk drive. So you can ask yourself a lot of questions about this mechanical electrical system. So, what happens if I move the head near the disk? Is that a good idea? What happens if I spin the patter faster? Does the bearing go? Does this arrive? What happens if I increase the read sensitivity? Can I do that? Is that a good idea? Can I increase the write current? Can I change the patter coating? Is there something better than ferrous oxide? What do I do about errors? can I improve the access time? That'd be good. Spin it fast will do that. Have a faster actuator. Is there a better head design? There's a lot of questions you could ask yourself. There's loads of areas for improvement in the disk drive. There's one snag I'll just point out at this early stage. They all sort of interact with each other, so you've got to be a little bit careful with this. You can't just change one, you end up having to change a few just to accommodate one. Now here's one of the problems. There's a head, there's a smoke particle, there's microns here, in the air, there's the side is on, the dust particle. So if I were to operate a disk drive in this room, I'm guaranteed head crash very quickly. And the problem with head crash is it takes the magnetic media off the disk, that's your data gone. And even better, it spreads the material you've just scraped off the disk onto other areas, so you can have other head crashes. So you don't want a head crash. As the heads have come closer, these things have become a problem. You need clean rooms to assemble them. I went to Seagate once and saw them. They had curtains of air around the equipment, like an ordinary factory set for these curtains of air, isolating the clean areas and more curtains of air, going into more delicate bits. And they have a standard which is higher than that used in operating theatres. And I was in an operating theatre and not asleep a while back, a year or two back, and they had these curtains of air too. So they got used to it, but they have their, and I think this is where they got it from. Now, you wouldn't think that when I started in the computer labs at KISS room, we all smoked. We smoked in the labs, there's no problem with that. Yes. We didn't know where we were going. There certainly became a problem. They even had a mag tape drive once when they complained of power towers. Went to have a look at it, and outside, these doors open, there's little sun outside. There's a guy dumping bags of cement and mixed them. He always mixes it there. And the whole thing was right. And they complained it wasn't working. Can't be clean, it's too much. Right. I wanted to just introduce the storage hierarchy a bit. There's your processor at the top. That has storage in it. It's got registers, it's got caches. We've got the main memory, RAM, we've got peripherals, disk drives, online libraries. Used to be tape libraries, this sort of thing. You see some on top. I put the cloud in my diagram, never seen it, but I thought it did because you can store stuff away there now, don't you? You get 70 gigabytes of people. That's a place you can store stuff. And then we've got offline libraries where people take disk drives off the site, take tapes off site, or put them in the safe. We used to put the disk drives in the tin tank safe to protect the data. So that's a very movable piece, that pyramid. Things move about in it. So you'll notice, as you go to the top, you need faster access. But as you go towards the bottom, you've got more data. You need lower cost per bit. So disk drives normally sit in the peripheral area, but they are up the other end of the cloud. Of course, that's there. People like Google have massive storage farms. But they tend to, but they can move that. Right, so I'll go on to drive history. I hope I've established a basis to talk about all this now. The first hard disk drive is an interesting question. Which was the first? The RAM drive is, from IBM, is held as the first. But Colin Thompson, from here, pointed to the introduction of another drive. And here it is. And also located a picture of it from that too, which is great. I've I've tried to enlarge it, but it never was a very good picture in the first place. This is 1953, and I think this picture was probably taken from an exhibition. And it's a lathe machine. Just motor, and I think you can just see this. You can't see much more in the picture, unfortunately, but this is what they presented, and indeed, as far as I can make out, used for about 8 months. But this is its characteristics. So we've got one for capacity of 8 kilowatts, spinning at 4,600 RPM, that's quite fast. 9 inches is quite small for the pattern those days. One surface, very great from what we were saying. 8 data tracks, 3 address and timing, 11 heads, all fixed, don't move out. And you could have another 8 heads if you wanted. And what was it used for? Cash. You know, it was very, very recent, I think, but that's what it was used for. Not as a peripheral. Not as a peripheral. And I don't know if it ever really got out in the field. It might have gone to a few customers. Did it get out in the field?
That one was replaced with a drum.
Might have.
Is there any chance you could turn the volume up slightly? I'm struggling.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we can do that. I'm struggling too a bit, I'm afraid. I apologise for the voice. And I do like to wander around a bit, so there we go. Yes, it got replaced by a disk drive. There's a sort of backwards move. They had the disk drives beforehand, and they've reintroduced it. And it's somewhat speculation about what problems they had. But that was 1953, and they were having a shot at a commercial drive, but it didn't make it. But this one did. 1956, 50 discs, weighs a ton. Here's a close-up of the mechanism. You've got one arm. It's although you could have another one, but basically one arm goes in and out, driven by air pressure. The head had a jet of air that held it up. Didn't rely on the disk speed, just jet of air. The arm weighed about 3 pounds, and it used to shoot backwards and forwards at remarkably fast times. And quite frankly, I think if you were talking about clocks, the Elliott one 3 years earlier is like a cuckoo clock, and this is more like a Swiss watch. They really did engineer it well.
What was the capacity there?
Well, good job you asked. Oops. So I had certainly got a slide with it on. Excuse me while I rattle through the pages. It's only a few megabytes. It's coming. I think it was 1 megabyte per disk, 50 megabytes for the 50 presses. So that's what it did. The surface layer was ferrous oxide, and there is a story about when it was in the labs. The guy who was developing it, they were trying ferrous paint it on the surface. They had one go and it was too lumpy. So so he strained it through his wife's nipples. Everybody remember that? So that's what he did, and that's the sort of world it was in those days, but that's the end result is a great piece of engineering. It could seek in 600 milliseconds, so it's a sixth of a second, and push that 3 pound weight, which I think is pretty good.
Does it seek vertically as well?
It does go up and down, yes, to access, the same here goes up and down to access things. There were there were about 20 tracks per inch, throw some of these figures in, not very much to compare these days. Sealed right easily. Probably could get one of the little viewers and have a look at the bits if you wanted to. Recording density was 100 bits per inch. Aerial density 2,000 bits per inch. And the head flew at 800 microinches. And the second arm was an optional arm which you could add to increase number of tracks. Here's an early one. I thought I'd throw these into, I think these were probably before the Ramat drive, but this is military. It's American military. And, you didn't hear much about them. You get photographs of them now, and bits of information. But I used to use these in radar systems, or RDF systems, until the earlier. There's another one there. I just threw these in to see the sizes of them. And these were probably in about 1 or 2 megabytes. Moving on to about 30 years, we've now got a, sorry, 30 years, 10 years or so. We've now got ICT, and this is an exchangeable disk with 2 disks, only 4 or 8 megabytes in it. You could have 2 of these in a cabinet, and that was considered enough storage system. Didn't need more than that. But you could replace them and lock them up in the back safe. Moving on to 1965, it's equipment I worked on myself. This is, now we've got to 7.25, and we've got a bit, and we're up to 350, 700 megabytes fixed. This is system 470 out of Kingsgrove. This Elite drive, this was an early drive from Seagate, used in my cell products. I've got my cell golf shirt on here. 5.25. You can see the capacities there, a lot larger. The drive itself wasn't dual access but control wheels. Servo surfaces or servo areas. You had a surface on this drive dedicated to doing track following as a sort of closed loop affair. You also had a thermal compensation area to it because as the disc got hotter, the tracks moved. And you need to know about that. Nowadays, it's even more complicated. Anybody ever designed anything for transport? Well, up on the reef, as they call it, you're at 5,000 feet, and you've got 25% less molecules in the air up there. So, for me, that was a cooling problem. Couldn't get enough air molecules past boards and things to cool them down. So you had to work at 25% above the spec in order to know you were going to work in transport. For disk drives, we've got this calculated with spinning the drive, we've got the air building up under the head, but there's 25% less of it. Crash, full. So you had to adjust the drive and the tensioning of the arm according to air pressure. So that's a late, not on this, it was a later innovation. Now, you may think that disk drives work pretty well all the time. You might think that you don't see disk errors. They're great, so you do.
I'm not making
You remember. Well, the truth in these days is you can't design a disk drive, because everything's got so small, that doesn't produce errors all the time, hundreds of them. It's always misreading. And over the years, they've developed clever correction algorithms, they start off with parity bits and more triple parity and ECC and Hamming codes and Reed Solomon, it's gone on and on, with different error correction codes. So you do your best to, the disk drive does its best to, it's quite sizable amounts of electronics, logic circuits, to correct the bits before you ever see them, so the data comes out right for you. But believe me, these disk drives cause errors all the time, internally, you just don't see them. They also come with faulty surfaces. So to get around it, this sector sparing the idea is, in a track, you put 2 extra sectors on, and you can map them so that if sector 3 breaks, and you move your spare sector, you switch it to the address of the one that's defective. Then you can do that twice before you've lost the track. If you lose the track, then you've lost the cylinder, because you've got a hole in it now, and you can have the So you can have an extra cylinder on the end or two, and you can swap that in. Just map it, swap it in. That's called cylinder slipping. Some of these things affect your performance a bit, but at least you're still working. And increasingly, these sort of things got used by the disk supplier to cover manufacturing problems. So you didn't really have as much spare capacity as they told you, but you wouldn't know about this issue in the disk industry. We used to, these drives spun at 5,400 RPM, used to hot swap them, pull them in and out, you'll see. That was an innovation at the time. SATA, IDs you can't do that with, SATA you can. And we used intelligent peripheral interfaces, which obviously is HIP plus. The bit about zones up there, I didn't explain that in the whole area of the disk, as you go in with groups of tracks, you can't put as much data on the inner tracks as you can on the outer. So and the transfer rates vary as well, because the packet disk is different. So transfer rates vary according to which zone or set of concentric circles you're in, concentric tracks you're in. And you can see the difference in rate is about 50% now. There's the disk drive we made, hot swap canisters with power supplies and drives in. We could put everything out, dual controller. If one controller went down, you could get your data through the other controller. Or indeed you could use it for a speed improvement. And that was the Series 39. Here's an up-to-date disk drive. Didn't have this in the slides last time. Western Digital 3 terabyte, low power, 3.5 inch drive. You can see the head's is very light, it's been hollowed out, only 4 platters. And the orange bit is interesting, that's a load-unload ramp, and I'll come back to that in a bit. It's quite new in disk drives really. 3 terabytes. Usual access times and things, really. And there's a really small one, a 1 inch drive, just to give you the scaling of these things. And where have you got 1 inch drives? On port minis. Got in there. Which got 2.5 inch drive in a laptop. 3.5 in PCs. Yes, it will, yeah. And the phones are getting into it. Just might as well cover. There's a 0.85 inch format that Toshiba brought out, expected to be in phones, and that's 4 gigabytes. So you'll have they say you have a problem counting up how many microprocessors you've got in the house. I mean, it used to be easy, there weren't any, but now it's quite hard. And I was thinking, how many disk drives have I got in my house that I know about? Don't necessarily know. I've got 3 in the room. I've probably got 3 in my own PC. My son's probably got about 4 or 5. He's terrible at storing stuff. And my wife's probably got 2. So a lot, isn't it? Probably more than average. Right, moving on to technology timelines and disk drive shipments, manufacturers, shakeout, that's been up a little bit. Here's a sort of timeline of technology coming in. This is the flying thing instead of a jet, the air cushion. Metal in gap, you took like an ordinary sort of ocean magnetic coil, metal alloy and increased the field doing that. Voice coil actuators, Stuttgart used to use voice coils in their floppy disks, and this was taken into disk drives to get a faster actuator. It's better than a stepper motor. Stepper motors got quite a lot of mass. This is really like a needle and a meter, so flip fast. Servo tracks to keep your head aligned with the data. Winchester, the drive I put up in the first place, that architecture is called Winchester architecture, invented by IBM. All the drives now have that architecture, they all do. It's very successful. Thin film heads, in order to, as you try to get it smaller, they started using thin film technology to make the heads smaller too. We saw it too earlier. IDE and ESDI were just interfaces were popular at the time, and controllers started to get quite complex in the disk drives as well around that time. SCSI interface, that's still around. IP interface, dead. PRNL. Dear me, well, what is it? It's partial response to maximum likelihood, that's what it stands for. Got me going for a minute. If you've got a signal, you can have a peak detector, which what we used to use, and you can just look at the peaks to determine where your clock should be. This system was far more complicated than that. I'm going to leave it at that because it's too much for this. Magneto-restrictive heads, these were produced even larger fields. And big change, we're just moving from inductively coupled heads to the magnetic effect of the data on the disk now changes the resistance in the head, and you're sensing a change in resistance rather than coupled magnetic fields, so that's a big change starting. VIDs, another interface that came and went. Shock sensing, so you could move the head to one side if you could detect a big enough shock. Bits per square inch going up. Giant magnetic magneto-restrictive heads. Giant because they're about, I think, about 10 times bigger space than they got out of the previous ones. This speed going up 1,000 RPM, 15,000 RPM, I think you get 20,000 these days. AFC media, this is important. What's the wonderful word? It's called anti-ferromagnetic coupling. A bit later on, I'll show you a limit called the simple paramagnetic limit. Who invents these? At the time that we're talking about here, the recording is all along the surface of the disc called longitudinal. I showed you a picture earlier. Well, they were coming up against this limit, which I'll explain in a bit. So they invented AFC media to lift the ceiling a bit. So that's what they did. I'll try and get into it. We could get into spintronics and things like that in this. Heat-assisted magnetic recording. I'm not sure why I should have put that in because I think that's only in the labs. PMR is perpendicular recording. Now which unfortunately undid the AFC. We've been talking about recording on the surface in like bar magnets lying flat on the surface. Here we've got, we effectively turned the bar magnet on its end. So it's now, we can see a north pole there, the south pole's in the material somewhere. Well, we can see a south pole and the north pole's somewhere deep in the material. So it's all sitting vertically now. Needless to say, the area of the end of the pole is a lot less than the whole bar, as you might say. So you can pack more in. Great, that's what we want to do, give you bigger discs. And then there's this 2.19 terabyte barrier this year. Some of you want to know about that. And of course we wanted eco-friendly drives. The days of spinning disk drives all day long are beginning to, people are beginning to want to turn them off if you're not using them. Here's a disk drive with ramp, load, unload. I just wanted to briefly go into this. You can see that as you can park the head on top of the head. It used to land on the disk surface, and this led to wear. Then they thought, well, this is called contact start stop. Then they moved it to the edge of the disk. So that was, at least you're only wearing it out there, but remember that loose material things, you don't really have that. So this was invented, but no, it's not much just to move it onto the ramp and park it. It does have some significant advantages. Firstly, you don't have to put a thick carbon coat, or as thick a carbon coat, on the disc to protect it against the head. When it's landing, you don't have to do that. So you can get closer to the head, you can have more data, more bits. That's an advantage. Another one is because you're not relying on the head to fly when it's on the ramp. You can slow the disc down. So just talking about running discs all day, now we can run them at 25% less power, 50% less power, and the spin-up time's not less. Because we can just park it on there while we're slowing down. And if we're talking about laptops, we can stick it on there. If your car's belting up and down and if you haven't got a disk drive in your car at the moment, you should well. When that's bumping up and down on the typical roads we're getting at the moment, it'll park it. So there's a lot of advantages. And of course it leads you into being able to say, well, I can put more data on, I can make it a little smaller. Well, you need a different actuator if you can do that, because how can you follow these little fine tracks you just created? So what you have is a piezoelectric sort of bridge just there, push pull, can change the horizontal dimension, moving in and out, and just keep you on the track. But you need another servo system for this. But never mind, we've got VLSI these days, and have another servo system. And of course we've increased our capacity. Here's just a quick view to show it's a car that finished in 2002, but you'll see that you only got 3.5 inch drives, fibre cord died, 814s aren't even there, and the 2.5 inch disc is just about coming in. There isn't much consumer electronics at this stage. This is a more modern one, at least it's got this year on it, and we're into tablets now. This is the light blue part, and you can see they expect tablets to take over and slowly, but PCs will still hold their own for quite some time yet. And of course there's mobile stuff like camcorder, things of this nature. And the shipments, I think it was about 250,000, and these are millions now, so we're talking about thousands more than we were just a graph ago, in 2002. Disc manufacturers, 1960, that's the one. Some of you may recognise some of them. This is just before PC came in 1980. When the IBM PC came in, suddenly we wanted more disk drives. So we got all these. So you might be able to find some of the ones that you know in there. And these, still in the 80s, these are all the disk drive people. I was involved with Red, I went there at one time.
Yeah, comment that the first disc I ever on was digital products.
Was it not on there? Oh, my apologies. If it, you didn't see it, right. Yes, you know, but and there was a disk drive. Yeah. Maybe they bought it. Maybe they bought it in. Did they buy it in? Did they buy it in though? They might have.
Oh, we were given it by RCA.
We bought ours in. We didn't do disk drives in those days. Bought them all in. Anyway, that's 1980s. 2004. That's all we're on. So, what a shakeout. All those hopefuls gone. That's where some of them went. There's a hopeful up the top there. IBM. Gone. Fujitsu. We used to use their drives. Gone. Down there, Western Digital still going strong. Seagate still going strong. So you can see there have been lots of mergers and acquisitions, a fair number of bankruptcies, and people who just give up and go down. Going was good. So it's quite a vicious business. But think of this growth going on phenomenally. Who the winners are and how much they're doing. I think at the moment. The leaders are Seagate with about 31% of the market, and I think Western Digital have 30%, and we thought to overtake them because of consumer electronics. Right, a few trends. I'll speed up a bit because I'm going to take too long. This was just a graph to show the big disk drives disappearing and the introduction of smaller ones in time. I'm not spending any time on that, so we haven't got it. Here's one that is interesting. I had to correct this one. If you go and buy a drive or overclocker or somebody on a PC book, you'll find they fall into three bands. The sort of budget, big, higher ones. And each year they move on. And you've seen the budget ones, you'd be a fool not to buy a terabyte drive now because for about 2 or 3 quid less you get a 250, why do it? So, but I put an asterisk on the 3 terabyte because we've got a Y2K problem there. So I'm not shouting about, but it's there now, and some people have not got 3 terabyte drives because of this problem. They've kept out of it a bit. And the sector size is moving up from 512 to 496. BIOSes can't handle it very well in your motherboard. Windows has a problem about the number of blocks. XP is not advanced format, AF is not compatible. The rest are okay-ish. So when you're buying a drive, well to be aware. If you're on Linux, great. If you're on 64-bit, pretty great. If you're on XP, terrible. If you're on Vista, you can use it for data, not your routers. Other ways around this, you can buy yourself a new motherboard with UFEI supported, or you can buy an HBA. We've got rid of these. Sorry, this is an adapter card. We've got rid of those. All got integrated in, but you can have one back again to split your 3 terabyte into a 201 or something like that. Right, this one shows the areal density increasing. It's a very important graph. There's a fiver. And you see it going up and hitting that big red bar stuck up there, which is this super paramagnetic limit. What's going on is that the molecules are, the magnetism, first of all, is facing the direction you wrote it at, and then because things are very small, temperature can actually flip it the other way. And oh dear, you haven't got a bit where you thought you had, and you get too many of them, your error correction doesn't work, and you're in trouble. And we're getting very close to that, we're making things so small that we're getting close to that problem. They originally lifted it by clever media, but what are they going to do now to lift that? And at 656, we're in that area between 10 to the 4 and 10 to the 5, with 6 up there already. So there are limits. Right, here's the proof. This has all been enabled for me, really. There's Moore's law on the bottom, and here's what's been happening with disk drives. A guy called Kreider, actually, I didn't know this when I started, but Kreider, who's a Seagate chief technologist for disk drives, he proposed this law in response to Moore's law when it was quite near the bottom, sort of 1960s to 70s, around there. And he thought, this is how it's going to go. And he said that the areal density would double every year, better than the transistors, number of transistors would double every 2 years. I think he started with 18 months and quickly changed it 2 years. So it's very aggressive. And you can see they've gone so far up the curve okay, and it's leveled off a bit, and then they've gone up and now they're leveling off. And you can see the technology is beginning to run out of steam. But I'd hope you think that that sort of performance is comparable, at least, if not better, than what happened with transistors. However, not so well known. I'll quickly go through this. What I'm really saying here is you've got a controller, you used to have a controller, drive, and your server and your mainframe, and 2 interfaces between them. These are sort of transfer rates you can retrieve. MacroLAN was an ICL fibre channel interface that we had years before anybody else. Before IBM as well. Because SCOM is a similar thing. And these are sort of transfer rates you get on them. And they're like mainframe interfaces, if you like, a lot of them. And this is what happened to those. A lot of them got killed. SATA 2 has gone to SATA 3. I think SATA is still IBM world only. 5 channels current, so all died. Another thing that happened from the early days is that the complexity shifted from some bit of the operating system moved out to the controllers, then moved out to the disk drives. Big shifting intelligence going into the drives, and everything else became simpler. Right, to wind it up. Ideas for future. This is really blue sky stuff. You could do this as well as I. Here's what's happening with mobile and consumer electronics. 2008 they were growing compared to enterprise disks, and they've grown an awful lot since then. You can see from an earlier graph that tablets are beginning to twist the tail of these graphs. And what a phone's going to do and cars going to do. Here's some technologies that may get us out of the problem. Oh, I should say, I nearly forgot. In case you think, oh well, we're trying to spread gloom here. In case you think, oh well, it's all right for magnetic discs and that they're going to tail off and they've got these problems, these physical limits. We're okay with transistors and Moore's law, aren't we? Do you think? We're not. In 2009, an IBM fellow stated that Moore's law had effectively topped out. And they would see some, improvement, maybe a couple of generations. We were told at work in 2023, physical limits would be reached. Sometime before that, practical limits would be reached. So it's going to be interesting the next 10 years. Watch the space. Something really dramatic has got to happen. Because another thing I haven't said is, till now, there are 256 exabytes. Somebody tell me how many 10 to something or others they are, but I think it's about 1.8 billion average drives, disk drives, of information in the world. And last year there was about 30% less than that. It's growing. And of course video's doing it, high definition television stuff, people keeping their recordings, and we're not going to be able to keep up with it, I don't think. Anyway, you can, when you're actually writing to disk, if you can shine a laser or something and use heat to help you to set the direction of the recording, that might help. You can you can actually change the way the media works, media is deposited, and try and control the size of grains better and the crystallization better. You do that. But if you have both of those, magically appear out of that 50 times better. And that's only 6 years. There's some really advanced stuff like these cobalt diamonds, I've forgotten what they are. Colossal magnetic resistance is even bigger than GMR. Those USB 3s and SATA 3s, I put them on 18 months ago. They're there. Get them if you pay for a high-end board now. Not on the average ones, but next year they will be. So, what are we going to do about superparamagnetism? Is it flash and SSD? Not if Moore's law is reaching its limit. Data slide, I'll show you in a minute. IBM racetrack memory, is that it? Magnetic poles, is that what we're going to have? There's this MRAM, forgotten about that now. Nanotube memory I've seen suggested. Magnetic monopoles, you can actually have a single north pole and move it like an electric current and store north poles over here without the south poles. Don't ask me how to do that. And a guy, I was at a lecture on storage generally on Tuesday, and he was saying he thought that holographic optical discs would have a future. Give us a factor of 1,000, he thought. But that was all. If they could make it work. And currently, and he was talking about atomic memory, but I can never see that working, placing atoms 15 a second. A long way to go. So to finish up with, is this a taste of the future? Here we've got effectively two pieces of material slide across each other, and you've got the top material's got all the heads in, right the way across, all tiny heads, and effectively you move them down the material, and you can read one head per sector that way, and you just pull it across, and you've got all your data very fast. Is this what we'll have? It seemed a year or so ago to be the thing that would work for me, but for all I know, it's gone dead by now. Thank you very much.
Questions?
This thing?
You can shout.
Neil, I think it's about somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago that I first heard about perpendicular recording, and it took until about 5 years ago to move to the mass market. One of your slides refers to a delay. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
One of the, yes, I can throw a little light on it, but not a lot. Obviously, the invention of the AFC media, where they had the material they were using for magnetic surface was cobalt, platinum, boron, I think, chromium, this sort of material. They had that and a thin deposit of ruthenium, I think, and then another layer underneath. When they introduced that, so that they got, if you magnetise that going that way, this one went the other way on the bottom layer, and they found that doing that they could push the ceiling up, so they didn't have to introduce the perpendicular one. The other problem is, when you think about it, the perpendicular one is, because you've only got the little surface up the top, you've got to fine-tune the rest of your system. It's okay saying I can record that bit, but can you follow the tracks still? You know, does the rest of your system work? Can you know, that's the problem. It's what I tried to allude to earlier when I was saying that all these things are interrelated. And I think having got a particular recording, we got it in the lab, the work to get it out into the field was quite bigger than they thought, I think. But fortunately, there was a rescue on the longitudinal side.
I don't think the history mentioned the removable disk pack.
I think I had some pictures of it. Yeah.
The 1311.
Oh.
IBM 1311 1964.
I may not have had IBM, but I had a data. I had one from ICL in the one from ICT, one from System 4. It's my background, I'm afraid. I didn't come up through IBM, and we didn't buy IBM products very
I
much.
should think about that System 4 disk drive you showed. My recollection is that was actually manufactured by Control Data. Because I used to work for Marconi's, and we had some of, we used the same factory, and we had some, we brought in some English Electric disk drives, and then we feed back to Marconi. And when English Electric and ICT merged, the English Electric sent an engineer out to change the badge on our disk drives. They had to take off the Marconi badge, take off the English Electric badge, and there was the Control Data badge. Then they stuck the ICL badge on top, and stuck our Marconi badge on top of that.
It's disgusting. I had a similar thing. We had System 4, and there was called 1900. And I had a guy from France, and he said, "This System 4 machine is absolutely wonderful. You know, is it available on the market now?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he couldn't get it because they decided that they weren't selling them in France until 1900. But rebadging was going on all the time, so it's,
A couple of comments. I think you severely flattered the capacity of the ICT twin exchangeable disk.
Did I?
Well, you probably maybe go the engineering as opposed to the actual practical usable.
I would do that.
You've got 1.6 or 3.2 per disk. The other comment was, if I can have a favourite disk, I think my favourite was the one that came from RCA, which saw light of day in this country as part of the ICT 1500. And it was the jukebox. And it literally was the jukebox mechanism with, instead of extended play discs, magnetic discs each. If I remember right, the capacity was about 22,000 characters on each disc. And if you had to change the platter, the average access time was about 4.5 seconds. And the thing just literally clumped around, the arm came out, picked up the disc, put it down on the read write head, and away you went. But speedy it wasn't. But it was good to look at.
I'd like to have told you about one on KDF9 that I remember, but I know very little about it. It was a very large, you could see at the top all the disc surfaces and a massive big box, as I remember it. I was very new in the profession those days, and we all used to walk past it. When it started up, I think, and they used to say that service, I think it was, do you remember service, washing machines? They used to make motors for it. I don't think it's true. Hi.
If we can have favourite discs, I would vote for Diablo removable disc drive. I have very happy memories of working in Auckland Museum and installing the computer in Wellington Museum and flying up and down every week with this 12-inch diameter disc pack in my rucks. Personal recollection.
Quite heavy, I should think.
Yeah, only one platter inside it.
Ah, right.
Does anybody remember the Brian disc? You used to walk across the floor.
I remember keeping the burrows with fixed heads on during the 3-day working week by special dispensation at Mark and Rochester.
Now those days I had it might have been a drive, it could have been can't read, my memory's failing on me now, but when the motor started, this big induction motor, when it started, everything in the computer had failed. And I didn't know that when it started, he used to take the local ground down to -250. And then it used to, that's the whole ground for the whole thing, and then it slowly climbed back up again as the motor was developing. It was feeling amazing.
At the risk of showing my ignorance, I go back to the very early days of discs, because before that, and with that, were magnetic tapes.
Yeah.
And magnetic tapes took a long time to die, because the disc somehow didn't quite take over. Every time they got the disc working better, the magnetic tapes working even better than that. But they've gone, as far as I can see. And the disc has taken over. And you look back at the magnetic tapes and say, what a crazy way to store data, non-linear medium. But I look back at the disc now and say, I hear about solid state memories. They cost a fortune. But they're significantly better because there's no startup time. So, and if you start there and look back at the disc and say, what a crazy way to do a memory. Always rotating stuff.
I tend to agree.
So when is the disc
the right? Well, it isn't. But the right function, of course, on stuff like flash memory is pretty slow.
Is it? Right.
Oh yeah, really okay. But some of you who are Vista and Windows 7 owners will have come across ReadyBoost. You know, the USB flash drive in the back with the subroutines and things, or bits of the operating system that don't change on there, so to be read off quickly. You can buy a hybrid disk drive now if you've got enough money, and that has built-in flash for that purpose, as well as, so it's all like hedging your bets, isn't it, in a way. But it is slower to write, to be writing.
It still seems to me that this are terribly clever, and clever things aren't good because they get complicated.
Yeah.
They want simplicity.
Yeah.
And I think a solid state disk without chips, not disk, sorry, disk in inverted commas, seems to me to be what the goal should be. But then I've been naive.
If disk drive technology actually falls over, it doesn't keep growing the way it is, and if the Moore's law does continue into the future a long way, then you can see the solid state eventually get there.
But I mean, how eventually? I can buy tomorrow.
There's very little of it now.
I can buy an Apple Macintosh laptop with solid state rather than disk in it. It's twice the price, so it's too expensive. But it's only twice the price now. So it's not going to be long before I'm going to buy an Apple Macintosh laptop with a solid state drive, and I shall, that's it for disks for me.
You could be right there, in that the disk drives could all migrate into the cloud, and you could just have enough local storage to get by. I don't think you will, but you won't have enough solid state disks.
I believe in personal computers, I don't believe in central computers because I used to run one.
problem with the disk drives and the solid state is that once you magnetically record it onto the disk drive, it has a life of many years. How long is the life of the data on the solid state? At the moment, they're talking about 5-10 years. I don't know what it really is. I mean, it relies on the number of electrons stored in a little area.
Then we're talking about archive stores where you want the stuff in the vault.
Right, in your personal computer.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to put the archive in an archive store where I can't get any quickly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know that's right.
You showed a picture of the big disk drive that you thought was a military base.
I did, yes.
That, I mean, it reminded me very much of the inside of the Burroughs disk drive from the late 1960s that I first worked on, which had some infinitesimally small capacity in a box that was about a 4-foot cube with an 8-foot high control unit next to it, being driven by a machine with the vast core size of 9.2K. But in fact, that did look very much like a Burroughs drive.
Well, you might
Just the
one of them was
components.
Fairchild. I don't know if you're referring to the other one. I think,
but
you could be right. We were having a discussion earlier about the early days of, where, like at Bletchley, the government for security reasons wouldn't lay anything out.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that in the States. They were more free with the information, etc. and encouraged it. So it wouldn't surprise me if what they used in the military also found its way quickly into the commercial world. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
That was quite an interesting machine to work on because you had all the tapes and you also had cartons of punch cards, not trays of punch cards, cartons of punch cards that appeared and were dumped onto the hard disk, worked on and then written out to a mag tape to carry over to the next week.
There's an IBM slide I saw of the RAMAC, and they've got a trolley like this, full of cards up to the height of the top of the RAMAC, and they say it's full of this. Of course, it's all this now. Underneath the trolley that they don't talk about. But yes, they store massive number of cards.
Following on from the earlier question about persistence of the data,
Yeah.
has that changed? Is that with these smaller and smaller and more dense things, has that dropped off?
It's an interesting point. I thought when the gentleman was making it that I can remember having to rewrite mag tapes once a year, to re-establish the magnetic field, and it does die a bit on discs. And depending on the material or making the disc surface out of, it can relax. And some people want you to rewrite the data as you go along, occasionally to keep the disc performance up. But I think in reality they've relied on only having a life of 3 to 5 years or something like that, and it lasts that long for most people. It doesn't last forever, that's for sure. It is actually going, and one of the things there's a lot of just enough sort of ideas in this world, and I think there's one round here that you can put your finger on. At the moment it's okay, but they definitely do lose amplitude. It's the thermal effect again. Somebody was talking about needle spikes the other day, and it's that effect going to erode your data at the edges. And if your edges are very close to each other, it's eroding your data.
Just like to observe that if you're really stuck, you could probably find a member of the CCS who could read just about anything. We did. You showed the illustration of the Elliott 401, and our guys did actually pull the initial orders plus the last data that was written onto the drum back in the 1960s off the machine when we started trying to resurrect it.
My point really is you need a clean room these days in order to do it, or you're likely to cause trouble.
You got to see the
You might as well forget it.
You ought to see the room down at Blythe House.
And by a clean room, I mean a really, really
Yeah.
clean room. But it used to be, dead easy. I used to read Mad Temps.
Mm.
Just like reading paper tapes all the time.
I have a memory of discs of my own when we first had one on our mainframe, daily problems. Like all this, you had head crashes. When you had a head crash on this disc, you had to get a block and tackle out and dismantle it, literally. Just doing that wide. And then subsequently made excellent coffee tables. Neil, thank you very much. We take a lot for granted, I think, in our business of computing. You know, it just happens. And one of the great things about CCS talks, in my opinion, is that every now and again someone lifts the lid on a particular bit that we take for granted. And we certainly take this for granted. And now we know a lot more about it. So thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure.
Can I, as usual, announce